Hey everyone, I'm Brett, and welcome to Nightwood Guns. In today's video, we are looking at the Johnny Glocks 4311 trigger. This is, in my opinion, the best trigger for these slimline Glocks. I have it installed in this Palmetto State Armory micro dagger. I just reviewed this. If you want to check out that review, I will put the card up above so you can check it out. In this review, I'm going to go over the pros and the cons of the 4311 trigger, along with comparing it to the combat trigger from Johnny Glock, so that you can decide which one, if either, are best for you. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I have some great videos coming up, including the Langdon Tactical PX4 Storm, a review of the TLR7 HLX, which, yes, is super dope, North American Arms' new swing-out cylinder Pug 22 Magnum, and much, much more. Now, hopping right into the video, the 4311 trigger from Johnny Glocks is meant to mimic a 1911 or 2011 trigger in a Glock, and I would say overall, it's a surprising success. So how exactly does it mimic a 1911 trigger? Well, it all comes down to the trigger pull profile. And as I show off what that's like, I will also bust out the combat trigger from Johnny Glock so that we can compare the two, so you can see which one's right for you. So with the 4311 trigger, there is significantly more take-up than on the combat variant, and that is for an added layer of safety, because once you see what the actual trigger pull is like, the fact that this doesn't have a manual safety on there, it needs just a little bit of a buffer zone in the pre-travel. So after we take up that pre-travel and hit this wall, it is a very crisp break, all the way through with very little travel. And the reset, very short, and it takes you right back to the beginning of that wall for another press. Other than the long take-up, it is a pretty darn good match, at least as close as a striker gun can get, to a 1911 or 2011 trigger, because when you hit that wall, it is a very crisp, clean break right through, and the reset is also very short and brings you right back to the beginning of that wall. Now, in my opinion, the way this trigger pulls allows you to more easily and repeatably get faster splits and squeeze off those precision shots, whether that be at distance or at a small target. The trigger press is very short and very predictable. Now, comparing that to the combat trigger has way less take-up. That's all there is. Just very little take-up to the wall. But when you pull the trigger, maybe quickly, it will look like the same thing. A little bit of travel, very crisp break. And the reset is still gonna look very short. You can tell the difference when you start pulling the trigger very slowly. Oh, I've had something in my eye this whole review and I'm fighting it. I'm fighting it, guys. I'm putting in the good fight here. I'm a victim of something being in my eye. It gives me so much social power. I'm such a victim. Oh. So the trigger pull profile of the combat trigger is very similar to Glock triggers or other striker fire triggers in that it is a rolling break. So when you start to apply pressure to the trigger, it rolls and then breaks. Versus the 4311 trigger where you hit a very distinct wall and then it just breaks instantly. So when we slow down our trigger pull, we have the take-up, hit the wall, and then slowly, it rolls through the break. Both of these triggers are, in my opinion, the best triggers for Glocks. Hands down. Which one you go with is going to boil down to personal preference, whether you want more of that rolling break if you're used to Glocks, if you're used to striker fire guns, and you just want the best version of that trigger, the combat is the way to go. If you're somebody who typically prefers hammer-fired guns, this is going to be really close to that if you can live with the longer pre-travel for safety. In my personal opinion, I prefer the 4311, but that's because I'm mostly running 2011s nowadays. In fact, if Johnny Glock ever releases a 4311 for the bigger guns, it's the only trigger I would ever replace my combat trigger with. However, I believe the vast majority of people are going to prefer the standard combat trigger. My reasoning for that is I think a lot of people interested in upgrading the trigger on their Glock actually are used to Glock triggers, and this is just the best version of that. I think the 4311 trigger might be kind of weird for Glock people. Now, as far as trigger weight goes, both of these come in at just under 4 pounds, so they're pretty comparable weight-wise. Now that we've gone over the personal preference stuff, Nothing is perfect, and there is one flaw to the Johnny Glock trigger that I think is worth mentioning. Before we hop into that, let's give a big thanks to today's sponsor, DPM Systems. DPM Systems makes recoil reduction systems, and they make it for so many different pistols. So whatever your preferred pistol platform is, they probably make a DPM system for you. While reviewing the PSA Dagger Micro and the Johnny Glock trigger, I was running a DPM recoil reduction system in the pistol, and this really helped me get those fast splits while maintaining accuracy on the target. These systems are great products for intermediate and advanced shooters that have their techniques squared away and want to squeeze a little bit of performance when shooting at speed. So be sure to check out DPM Systems, that is a .com. Once you've made your selections, be sure to enter my channel name minus the guns when you're checking out to get a little bit of a bonus. Now, as far as negatives go, on the 4311, I only experienced one through the 1,000 rounds I ended up putting through it, and that is the trigger shoe gets hot. This is a metal trigger shoe and it conducts heat. These slimline guns heat up way faster than the bigger guns, and it got to be so hot on the trigger shoe that I had to take a break and stop shooting for like 20 minutes to let it cool down. Now, if you're using this as a defensive pistol, or if you're just putting a few boxes through it at the range in a single session, you're not gonna have an issue. But when I was putting 1,000 rounds through this, and I started to hit, 300 rounds in a short period of time, the trigger became too hot to touch. Now, as far as compatibility goes, obviously the whole 4311 kit drops right into a Glock 43X or Glock 48. But when it comes to the clones like the Micro Dagger here, there can be some tolerance issues. It did drop right into the Micro Dagger, but I had to use the safety plunger that came with the dagger instead of the one that came with the 4311, just because the tolerance was a little different than an OEM Glock. Now, another negative that I think is worth mentioning is the price. This comes in at $280, and if you're unfamiliar with Johnny Glock and you don't know why these triggers are so much, let me explain. So Johnny has figured out the perfect geometry to get the best, crispest pull out of a Glock. Glocks are not known for having the best triggers. And not only that, he goes so far into polishing this that it is butter smooth on top of that short, crisp break. Obviously, when everyone talks about something like the Walther PDP and how amazing of a trigger it has, they're comparing it to an OEM Glock usually, and the Johnny Glock trigger helps elevate the Glock to that level. It makes your Tupperware Glock seem like a $1,000 plus gun. That's how amazing it is. However, it's worth mentioning that this trigger will not turn you into a better shooter. You will not get incredible results out of this trigger that you never would have been able to achieve otherwise. This is simply a tool for the intermediate or above shooter to squeeze out a little more performance out of your Glock pistol. Whether that be faster splits while maintaining accuracy because it takes less effort to pull the trigger, or breaking a precision shot at distance, or shooting smaller targets up close, this is simply an advantage. So if you want to get as close as you can to a 1911 or 2011 style trigger with that buffer zone of safety with the pre-travel, then the 4311 trigger is going to be your best option for a Glock. The links in the description below are the place to be if you want to further support the channel. That's where you can find my Patreon, my awesome short novels on Amazon if you're looking for something kick-ass to read. I also have some brand new awesome merch, so if you want to pick up a shirt to rep Nightwood Guns, be sure to check it out. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, everyone. I'm Brett, and this was Nightwood Guns. Nightwood out.